Hello, everyone. Today we'll continue talking about Plato's Apology. And here are some of the other. A lot happens in this work. Here's some of the other crucial elements that happen within it. And one is that we see Socrates presenting the nature of philosophy as a way of life, a way of relating to the world, a way of structuring your entire life. And here are some of the cool things that Socrates has to say. So Socrates realizes that some sophists and some traditionalists can bring charges against him and maybe even face death. And I want to emphasize that my use of the word traditionalist here does not mean to say that you cannot be a philosopher and a traditionalist, that you cannot defend tradition. In fact, some of the great philosophers in history, like St. Thomas Aquinas, have been great defenders of tradition. I'm using the word traditionalist here to mean someone who blindly follows the tradition, which is kind of the way in which Plato seems to be painting the picture. So that's what I mean. You can be a great philosopher and defend the tradition by having thought about it, by having understood it and identified legitimate values and reasonable answers to philosophical questions, and then championing those. It's really the way of relating to the tradition that marks whether you're a sophist or a philosopher. That you champion it or not, that's what makes you a traditionalist. So they're orthogonal categories. But anyway, Socrates realized that he was getting in trouble with people with power, and he might even face death. Why did he continue philosophizing given the possibility of death? Here's some of the things he said, some of the cool things he said. You see, fearing death, gentlemen, is nothing other than thinking one knows what one does not know. I mean, no one knows whether death may be the greatest of all goods for people, but they fear it as if they knew for certain that it is the worst thing of all. So Socrates' philosophical starting point of humility, of intellectual humility, points out that a lot of people fear death as though it were something horrible. But that's to assume or act as though you know more about death than we actually do. Socrates claims that we don't know whether death is good or bad. Well, it might be very good for all we know. So the wise person recognizes their lack of knowledge about how good or bad death is. So does not treat it as bad because they don't know that it is bad. And you should begin with what you know, and you don't know whether it's bad. It is foolish to fear what you don't know, if it's good or bad, worth fearing or not. And he actually goes farther. Here's what he says. If I really were to claim to be wiser than anyone in any way, it would be in this. So here's his great wisdom, that as I don't have adequate knowledge about things in Hades, the afterlife, so too I don't think that I have knowledge. Socrates does not know what happens in the afterlife, if anything. To act unjustly, on the other hand, to disobey someone better than oneself, were that God or man, that I do know to be bad and shameful. Sorry, I did not say that correctly. On the one hand, Socrates claims that he does not know what happens in Hades, the afterlife. He doesn't know what happens to death and after death. He does know, however, this is the second sentence, that to do something unjustly, to act wrongly, is bad, wicked, and shameful. He does know that about morality, and that's an important piece of wisdom. In any case, let me continue reading. I'll never fear or avoid things that may, for all I know, be good more than things I know are bad. So think of that last sentence. It's a very important sentence. Another crucial piece of wisdom here. I'll never fear or avoid things that may, for all I know, be good more than things I know to be bad. The wise person recognizes that if you have two courses of action, one of which you know to be bad, and the other one you don't know whether it's good or bad, it is foolish to go with the first option, the one you know is bad. Uh, when you're wise and you face that alternative, you always go with the second course of action, the one that may be good. And he thinks that's just what happens with death. I don't know whether death is good or bad. I do know that doing something wrong, disobeying God will send me to philosophize, claims Socrates. That would be wrong. Disobeying God would be wrong. So I may face death if I comply with God's command to philosophize. But I don't know if death is good or bad. In that context, in that situation, that's what the last sentence illustrates. The wise person obeys the gods and continues philosophizing, even if it means death. So let me give you this into an actual clear presentation of an argument in terms of premises and conclusions and so on. Here's the first premise, the first claim that is going to be used as reason or evidence for a conclusion that the thing to be supported. Claim number one, premise number one, it is wicked and shameful to do wrong, disobey your superiors. And Socrates thinks that God commanded him to philosophize. So to disobey God would be wrong. So because it is wicked and shameful to do that, to disobey God. And he knows that. Socrates knows that ceasing to philosophize is to disobey God and therefore is to do something wicked and shameful. Two, this is the last sentence in the previously stated quote. It is foolish to avoid what may be good for what is known to be wicked and shameful. Three, crucially, no one knows whether death is good or bad. Death may be good for all we know, right? And if you look at these claims, something logically follows. Uh, the claim number two is like a principle that has variables. And premise number one is one of the values for those variables. And premise number three is the other value for those variables, right? Premise number two says, it is foolish to A, that's one of the variables, avoid what may be good. For B, that's another variable, what is known to be wicked and shameful. And one is the value of B, right? The second. And three is the value of one, right? You just plug them in like a mathematical equation. Here's what follows. It is foolish to do wrong in order to avoid death. This is a grand conclusion. This is a very strong conclusion that Socrates deduces from 1, 2, and 3, and it just follows logically. And 1, 2, and 3 seem obviously correct. So here's the kind of power of philosophical thinking, power of Socratic ways of going about trying to understand things that matter. And here's another conclusion that follows from that more generally. Virtue is better than avoiding death. And that's a great kind of a very grand conclusion. And notice the way in which Socrates is having you think about this. It's not like the declaration of a credo or a faith-based claim in which he says, "Here's what I believe. If you believe it too, come along. And if not, not." Right? He's not. It's not a mere faith, mere kind of belief with no reason appeal to your moral consciousness. And that it's not anything like that. It's something like use your reason to think about the nature of wrongness, shamefulness, obedience, foolishness, death, knowledge, right? All of these crucial notions, put them together in this particular way. Reason your way to this conclusion. Socrates is not resting this conclusion on his authority, his experience. It's none of that. He's resting this conclusion purely on the basis of reason, and he's trusting your comprehension or your grasp of the relevant notions that I enumerated: wrongness, shame, foolishness, and so on. So he's inviting you to use your reason to come to this conclusion. Uh, the authority itself is not him, it's your reason, your own ability to think about these conclusions. That's what philosophy is about. And the conclusion is a very strong one. Virtue is better than avoiding death. Socrates continues philosophizing because that's pursuing truth and pursuing virtue. And that is wiser than avoiding death. Avoiding death is not as valuable as pursuing virtue, is the conclusion. It's a very grand conclusion here. So Socrates knows a lot more. Pieces of Socratic wisdom extend far beyond the humble humility of I don't know. He actually does know a lot of significant things that have important consequences. And here are some more of them. Socrates writes, or Plato writes on Socrates' behalf. This you may be sure is what the God orders me to do. And I believe that no greater good for you has ever come about in the city than my service to the God. You see, I do nothing except go around trying to persuade you, both young and old alike, not to care about your bodies or your money as intensely as about how your soul may be in the best possible condition. So no, here's more crucial Socratic wisdom. Socrates thinks, and he's inviting you to use your reason to come to the conclusion that the state of your soul is more valuable, it's more important than in the state of your body and how much money you have. And if the word soul is throwing you off, you think like, hey, there are no souls. What's up with that? Like science. You're misreading things here. Socrates by soul means something like your personality, something like the principle of animation of the body, like the self. It is an open question if the soul survives the death of the body, right? He just told you that. Um, he doesn't know whether your personality, your intelligence, like your character, the thing that is not like as easily tangible, that is essential to who you are yourself, if that thing survives death or not. I mean, that's why he doesn't know what happens to that, and he's very happy talking about souls. So he's saying the state of your soul, your personality, yourself, your character, it's more valuable than the state of your body and your soul, and how much money you have. Sorry. Here's the teaching. Here's the basic positive teaching that Socrates put forth. It is not from wealth that virtue comes, but virtue comes money and all the other things that are good for human beings, both in private and in public life. At the heart of Socrates' positive teaching, not just humility of not knowing, what he does know that matters is that virtue is more important than other things, that other goods are secondary to and depend upon or follow from virtue, the perfection of one's soul. So, and he issues the following challenge. Now, if by saying this, Socrates teaching, I'm corrupting the youth, this is what you have to think to be harmful. In other words, how can anyone possibly think that it is harmful for the youth to make them care for the soul and care for virtue? Like, this is nonsense. These accusations are not on the basis of truth. Something else is driving. So, Socrates continues. It's in that light, men of Athens, that you should obey Anytus, one of the accusers, or not, and let me go or not, knowing that I wouldn't act any other way, not even if I were to die many times over. Death or avoiding death is not as valuable as pursuing truth. That is to give more value to the prolongation of your body than it is to having no virtue. And Socrates thinks that's a foolish decision. Prolongation of your body is not worth the state of your soul. So Socrates is willing to face death for the following. Here are the main reasons why Socrates is willing to confront and face death. And not he's not going to avoid death. Uh, why? Because of truth, pursuing truth, having truth, attaining truth, not just any truth, but truth about the self or the soul, but the individual and social virtues, justice, temperance, courage, perseverance, benevolence, and so on. It is attaining of truth about those things that matters. In having of those things, the virtues themselves, being temperate, being courageous, being having intellectual virtue, and so on. He's willing to face this death for the having of those virtues, for the pursuing of those virtues. And he also emphasized, front and center, uh, he's willing to face death as a response to the call of the gods, a vocation he has in particular about pursuing truth and virtue. So he's pursuing one in truth and virtue, and he's doing so as a response to the call of the gods. So there's this extra layer of vocation. Socrates is responding to God's calling to be a philosopher. So here's Socrates' take on death, right? Here's again the picture of Socrates pointing to heaven, saying, about to take the poison. He was condemned to death. He did not win his case. He's about to die. The slave is giving him the poison. He's about to drink it. Everyone's distraught, like, oh no, this wise person's gonna die. But he's optimistic. He's looking up. He's not sad. He's not afraid of death. He tells us something more. Here's what he says. But let's bear in mind that the following is also a strong reason to hope that death may be something good. In other words, he doesn't know whether death is good or bad, but he has some reason, strong reason, to hope that death may actually be good. And he says, here are the only two alternatives. Death is either nothingness, the soul is just this psychological state of consciousness that depends on the body or something to that effect. And when the body ceases to be in death, the soul ceases to be. That's one of the options. And here's the second option. There's a kind of migration of the soul from here to elsewhere. Somehow your personality or yourself can continue on even though your body ceases to be. Those are the only two options. If nothingness, here's what Socrates says. Well, if death is like that, just nothingness, cessation of consciousness, I say it's an advantage, since in that case, the whole of time would seem no longer than a single night. So to call it an advantage seems a bit too strong, but at the very least, there's nothing to be afraid of, right? There's just nothingness to, uh, uh, if there's nothing there, there's nothing to be afraid of, right? Then it's foolish to be afraid of nothing. So one, nothingness is not a reason for fear. How about two? What if there's this migration of the soul, your personality, yourself somehow endures? Uh, I'm not going to quote because he goes on for a long time talking about this, but here's the basic gist of his point. Socrates can spend time with great wise men and gods who have also died and gone to whatever it is they do, they go. And and that would surely be wonderful. If there is a migration of the soul, it will be great. Socrates can go on philosophizing in heaven, can go and talk to the great wise men and gods of the past about philosophy, and perhaps they'll have better answers than the politicians that in Athens times. So that seems like something worth looking for. And here's a cool quote that close to the end of the apology. But to you, gentlemen of the jury, should be of good hope in the face of death. So you too, like not just Socrates, but other people too. Bear in mind this single truth: nothing bad can happen to a good man, whether in life or in death, nor are the gods unconcerned about his troubles. Gods care about human beings, care about the affairs of human beings, and that gives us a reason for hope because the gods are good. And because of that, there couldn't be any harm in the afterlife because the gods are in control of the afterlife and they wouldn't do anything wrongful. So if you're a good man, if you're a just, virtuous person, you cannot be harmed in the afterlife because the gods wouldn't harm you. Because to harm is to make your soul worse off, and gods wouldn't do that. Socrates continues. What has happened to me hasn't happened by chance. Rather, it's clear to me that to die now and escape my troubles was a better thing for me. It was for this reason that my sign never opposed me. So he talks about a sign, he talks about a daemon, which is from where we get the word demon. But when we say demon, we mean like demonic, something very bad, fallen angels. When Socrates talks about his daemon, it is a angel-like character. It's a being between men and gods that is helping. So it's a good thing. It's like a connection with God. It's like an angel. So it's something positive that Socrates claims is guiding him, and he thinks if there's something divine guiding, it can be by chance. There's something good is going to come out of this. So there's this fundamental trust in God, in God's will, in God's organizing the world that Socrates has, and he relies upon that fundamental trust as a way of having a strong reason for hoping that death may be good. Here's the final line in the apology. Now it's time to leave, I to die and you to live. Which of us goes to the better thing, however, it's unclear to everyone except the God. So Socrates encounters death with courage, with wisdom, with tranquility. He lived well, he died well. There is a wisdom that he has that is worth having. And the apology is a great presentation of that. I'll stop here. I'll see you next time.